Hello, my name is Lee Taylor, and I really like to knit, so much so that some of my friends call me the Knitwit. I hope you enjoyed today's video and possibly even learned something. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to Knit Bits number 16. This week we are going to be doing the last of the book looks. We're going to be going over the books that I have in my library that are pattern books. Not stitch dictionaries that tell you how to knit a pattern, but a knit row by row by row and you will end up with this product. We are also going to be doing some swatching together. We're going to be looking at a very common increase, the knit front back, abbreviated to KFB. We are going to be looking at some project updates, and then I have two bonus bits for you, and as well as a announcement concerning next week's video. So stay tuned. Our first book in the book look is 25 Gorgeous Sweaters for the Brand New Knitter by Catherine Ham. This was the first book that I bought for myself. I got it from the library originally, and as soon as I knew I loved it, I had to have it. This book is where I got the pattern for the 46 LiMiT, and this is called the Loose Line Garter Stitch Jacket. Next we have, this one was a gift, and it's Harry Potter Knitting Magic, the official Harry Potter knitting pattern book by Tanis Gray. There are a lot of patterns in this. Here's a preview of some of them. There's two sweaters in here that I want to knit. One is a pullover and one is a cardigan. And then lastly, patterns. It's just a 3-ring binder. This is what I use for my personal patterns, or ones that I have printed out and can have the hard copy in here. So we will go over a couple of these more in depth in the overhead, so stay tuned for that. In the Swatch Lab this week, we're going to be going over a very common, some might say the most common increase, the KFB, as well as a variation on it that I found from another knitting channel. And if I can find the video to that, I will link it down below in the description. But it's the KFB and then the KFS. So we will jump over to the overhead and take a look at our Swatch Lab this week. This week's Swatch Lab, we're going to be going over knit front back, KFB, and knit front slip, KFS. And I want to show you what I've got started for us, because I didn't figure you needed to see the cast on since we did that last week, and I will link that video down below. And then I just knit garter, just to give us a section ready for our swatch. I've got my little stitch marker here, Shawn the sheep, to show me which side is the right side. I don't always use that, especially if I'm knitting something like this, because I know for me that the tail, the yarn tail, on the left side of the project means that I'm on the right side. That's just me. Different people do prefer different ways. The stitch markers here will indicate where we are going to be working our increases. So I wanted to make sure I didn't work right along the edge, although you can on either edge, whichever one. I just wanted to, come in one from the edge. So I have cast on 9 stitches, and again I have 4 different stitch markers, simply to show where we are going to be working the increase and how that changes the fabric. I do have the handy dandy yarn wand handy to show what's going on, as well as my new gauge ruler, so we can look at the gauge of this particular project. So let's get started. So as I mentioned, we're going to be doing a KFB, and all that means is you knit the front leg of a stitch as well as the back. So let's jump straight in and do that. So I'm going to knit to my first marker, and this is a very, very easy increase to do. A lot of people learn this right after the yarn over, and that is exactly why I have it where I have it in my Swatch Lab. So when we go to knit front and back. And I'm going to be showing this in garter stitch. You can also do this in stockinette. It works perfectly fine in both types of fabric. So when we go to work a knit front back, we're going to work it into this stitch right here. Okay? We're going to go in as if to knit. Okay? Wrap the yarn and knit it. Okay? Just like we would every other time. However, we're not going to slide this stitch off of this needle. We're going to pull out some slack and twist these stitches, these needles around, and see how there's a front leg here and there's a back leg here. Okay, see that? Let me do it this way. This is the front leg, here's the back leg. We are now going to take our working needle and go into that back leg like that. Okay? And we're going to, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bump that. We're going to now wrap the yarn around the needle and bring that out. Okay? Just like so. So what we have done now is we have added a new stitch. Let me zoom in here a little bit. So we've added a new stitch right here. And you can tell because there will be a purl bump right underneath the needle. Can you see that? Here we have our regular knit, and then we have a bump right underneath the needle. That is important when we come to it in the next row. Okay? Not the next wrong side, but the next row in general. So I'm going to zoom right back out here, like so. I have my microphone hooked right underneath the phone, and I don't want to accidentally bump it. So next we're just going to knit the next stitch. Okay? So you can already tell where originally we had 2 stitches, now we have 3 stitches. So we have increased 1 stitch. Slip our marker. And we're going to KFB again. So we're going to knit through the front leg of the stitch. Pull out a little bit of slack, flip that around, and take it through that back leg. Just like so. Okay? It does look like it's very tight, and it is because I'm using yarn that is actually too large for these needles. But I wanted to make sure that you could see what I'm doing with this process. So then you just bring the yarn right back out. That's why it gets shaky like that. And now we have increased another stitch. So we've made 2 increases. So our original 9 stitches is now 11. Okay? Now we're going to do once more right here. Knit front. Take it around to that back leg. Knit. So we are quite literally knitting front and back. Okay, knit that stitch. Slip the marker. And the KFB one more time. So knit through the front leg like normal. Leave the stitch on the needle. Pull out just a little bit of slack. Swipe those needles around. Enter through that back leg. Wrap the yarn. Come right back out. And put down onto the shank, the full size shank of the needle. And then we're going to just knit that last stitch. Okay? So our original the original 9 stitches is now 13 stitches, because we now have 3 in each section, which would be 12, plus our selvage stitch. So when you're working on the wrong side, you're just going to treat them all like as if they are regular stitch, and if you want to purl all of these for stockinette, you can. If you want to knit all of these for garter, you can. I'm going to knit them all. Okay, so here we have our first increase, because that was our edge, this was our first stitch, so this is our increase. Okay, it doesn't look a whole lot different from all the other ones. So we're just going to knit right across this row. And this was one of the first increases I learned how to make. Now, I had made a bunch of accidental increases by doing yarn overs and a bunch of other techniques that I did not intend to do over the years while I was learning how to knit. And it's interesting because as you make those beginning mistakes, you're doing sometimes some very complex knitting maneuvers, and you don't even realize you're doing it. So good for you if you've accidentally added stitches, because you have already inadvertently learned how to do something, although you didn't intend to do it at that moment, which can be frustrating. So we are knitting back across all of our stitches, knit every single stitch. At least that's what I'm doing in my swatch. If you want to purl for stockinette, you can. And now that we are at the end, we're going to slip our marker and knit that last stitch. Okay. Now let's flip this around and take a look. Okay, it's a little wonky here. Okay, let's zoom in here. There we go. Okay, what we have, and you can see it really well on this row right here. I'll bend this back a bit so you can see. So that's what a row of stockinette would look like. So here we have our regular stitch, and it's gappy because I'm right along the edge here. But here we have our regular stitch, and then right here, see that little bump? That is a purl bump, and that means that right there we made a knit front back. Plain stitch, knit front back bump, purl bump. Kind of like a collar. Plain, bump, plain, bump, plain. Okay? So that's what it looks like. One of the most important things that you can learn in knitting is learn how to read your knitting, so you can see exactly what it is that you've done, so that for this, if we did an increase row, and the next time, not the back, not the wrong side, but the next right side, we want to just knit a plain round or plain row, we can look back and see what it is that we've done, so we know if we're on the plain row or if we're on another increase row. So as you're knitting, stop every once in a while and look what you've accomplished, and see if you can spot when you've done something different, what it is that you've done. Does it have a purl bump collar? Well, then you've made a knit front back. Does it look like there's a rope lying on top and then with a valley below? Well, then you've got garter stitch. Do you see a bunch of V's up and down? Well, then you are on the knit side of stockinette. So those are all something that you can do to help yourself progress your knitting. So now we have done the knit front back. I'm going to decrease these back down to our original 9, and then in this next bit I will show you the knit front slip. Now we are going to be doing the KFS, which is knit front slip back. Some may put KFSB. I don't. In all of my patterns that I use that, I always write KFS. But on all of my patterns, I make sure at the very bottom there's a glossary that I put what my abbreviations mean and how to do this, such as the KFS. So look for those if you knit any of my particular patterns. So now let's work the KFS. It is very simple. We're going to knit to our first marker so we can do our first increase. Okay? So we're going to knit in that front leg, just like before, just like any normal stitch. Okay, let me zoom in here just a smidge. There we go. Get the yarn wrapped around my hand how I like. Now we're going to come back, spread these out, and go into that back leg just like that. Okay. However, instead of knitting this, we are going to now just slide that right off of that stitch. Okay. So we have knit a stitch and then we have slipped a stitch. KFS. So knit a stitch, slip the marker, knit front, and slip back. This works very well on the selvage edge of, say, a shawl pattern. Let me do this one more time and I can talk in the next row here. Knit front leg, wrap around, pick up that back leg and slip it off. Knit stitch, slip marker, KFS, knit front leg, bring needle around, pick up that back leg. Let me do that again. I think I was off screen. We're going to knit in that front leg. Sorry, I bumped the microphone again. Knit that front leg. Bring the needles around. Pick up that back leg. And we're going to just slip it off the needle. So KFS. And then we're going to knit our last stitch. Okay. Now we're going to flip this around and we're just going to knit all across these stitches, just like any other wrong side row where you're working in garter. Just knit every single stitch. If you want to knit one, purl one all the way across, you can. If you want to purl all the way across, you can. You can work your wrong side however you want to in your Swatch Lab. For me, it will always be knitting, or almost always knitting. Not always, but most of the time I'm just going to be working in garter. Now, as I mentioned, the knit front slip is very good to use on the selvage edge of, say, a shawl, where you want the shawl to increase on this side and increase out this way, but you want the look of a slip stitch edge. An example of a slip stitch edge I have is this right here. Okay, see, I slipped that last stitch, and see that little chain edge there? That is because I slipped that stitch. So if you want the look of a slip stitch while still doing increases, you can use the KFS, because that's exactly what you're doing. You're knitting one leg and slipping the other. So you're slipping a stitch, therefore you'll have a slip stitch edge. So let's knit this across, and then we're going to look at what I've done with the KFB, the knit two together, which is the decrease I used to get back down to my original number, the KFS, and we will look at that. We will look at the gauge of the swatch, and we will just take a look at things a little bit more up closely and see what it is that we have done in our gauge swatch for this week. It's a gauge swatch in that we are practicing and we can learn to see what gauge we are getting, but we are not doing a gauge swatch for the sake of a pattern, merely to learn a technique. However, you can make notes on your gauge swatch of what size needle you used, what size yarn you used, what technique you did, and store that in a file of some sort, whether it be digital or hard copy. And then you can know if you are needing to knit a scarf and you want a particular gauge, you can look back and see what you did to get what particular gauge. So keep these on hand and make good notes. You will thank yourself. Your future self will thank you. Okay, so let's zoom in here. And I zoomed in with the camera, but I want to make sure that we can actually see stuff. So I'm also moving the camera slightly away. So down here, we have our KFB. Okay, see the regular stitch and then that little bump? That is a KFB. Okay, up here, we have knit two together. Okay, so you see stitches laying on top of stitches at a diagonal. Okay, now up here we have our KFS. Let's take a look here at this middle section. So we have our knit stitch. Okay, knit stitch, and in the back right here you have that extra little leg. Sorry, I was off screen. Knit stitch, it's hidden back here. Knit stitch, and then you have a knit stitch. I am off screen again. I apologize. Selvage knit stitch. This leg is over here, and then the back leg is hidden back behind, and you've got another knit stitch. Okay, that back leg behind is where we slipped. Okay, so KFS, knit stitch, stitch with the other leg behind, KFS, knit stitch, knit stitch, knit stitch with the leg behind, KFS, knit stitch. So those are two separate increases. We have the KFB, then I work some knit two togethers, and then we have a KFS. I don't use the KFS as often. I use those specifically along the edge of a shawl because I want that slipped appearance. You can use those interchangeably. I'm going to be talking next week about when you would and when you would not be using particular knitting techniques, so stay tuned for that. But now I want to take a look using this, and let's show what that is going to look like. Okay, so this is over a window of 2 inches. Okay, so we're going to count our stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's just the tail end of one. So we're going to round down. Hold on, I don't think I'm reading the right row here. Nope, I am. Sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, and just a tiny partial. That is over 2 inches. Now, let's say you're knitting worsted weight yarn and in garter on the appropriate size needle, you're going to get 5 stitches over 1 inch. We got 4 stitches over 2 inches. This is very bulky yarn with very large needles. Now I'm going to flip this over because this stitch marker is making it a little tricky for me to lay this on the way that I want. Now we're going to be measuring our gauge over 2 inches as our row gauge. So let's take a look at that. Now ideally you'd want to knit longer than what this is. You want a good area to check, and I know some people will check over here and they'll check over here and they'll check over a large area to get a better average. But for the sake of what we're doing, I just wanted to explain how this is used. So right here, and we're working in garter over 2 inches, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's just half the ridge of garter right there. So we're getting 4 stitches to the inch and 9 rows to the inch, or would be 4.5 ridges to the inch, which is normal for garter. It's very squared. So this is, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's actually a half stitch right there on this side. So 4.5 and 4.5. That is how garter stitch works. It is very squared off and very useful in patterns in designing to know that garter stitch is squared. So I just wanted to go over this week. Let me zoom back out that way. I just wanted to go over this week the KFB and the KFS. Again, if I can find the video of where I learned KFS, I will put that in the description below. And I just wanted to go over, I didn't care about showing the knit two together. I'd already done a video on that, and I will link that down below. But that is us knitting our little swatch. We used the new gauge ruler to learn what gauge we are knitting at. We can even use this gauge ruler, take this needle, say we don't know what size it is, and you'd go through, okay, it doesn't fit there, and you're going to push through until it's the first, until it's the first hole that it goes all the way through. Usually you want it to feel a little bit snug. This size would be considered a 10, although it's a little small, but it's too large to be a 9, so that would be considered a 10. They don't have a 9.5, and this I don't even think would be a 9.5, so it is a 10. And you've got a big, large needle. But this is a very handy tool. I talked about this last week. I will link down below to that video. But that is our Swatch Lab for this week. Next up, we have our project update section. I have quite a few things to talk about, including the start of my Christmas knitting, a gnome that is technically a Thanksgiving gift, the best scarf ever, update on my LiMiT Cardigan, Nebula, and talking about the temperature Afghan. So stay tuned, we have a lot in store for this week. First up in the update section, we are going to be talking about the beginning of my Christmas knitting. What I have for so far is the top of a hat. It's going to be worked from the top down, obviously. This is a fingering weight yarn that I'm holding triple in what I'm calling the slingshot method. And so I will go over details about that in the overhead to come. Let's take a look in the overhead of this hat here. Again, I'm working it from the crown down. And what I did is I used Judy's Magic Cast On, which I will do a video to in the future. And I cast on 4 stitches, did a KFB in every stitch, so it bumped up to 8, KFB in every stitch, so it bumped up to 16, and then I did a KFB 8 times around, so I had 8 points of increases until I got to my 80 stitches that I wanted. Now, towards the end, I did work a plain row in between to get, and this yellow marker marks the end of my crown increases. So the rest will just be knit flat or knit straight until I have a completed hat, and then I will knit 10 rows of 2x2 ribbing to finish off the hat, followed by a very stretchy bind off. This is a fingering weight yarn that I am holding triple in my slingshot method that I use most often. The colorway is Prairie Rain. It is by Yarn Bee Authentic Hand Spun, I believe is what it's called. I don't have the label with me anymore. But this is the first of my Christmas gift knitting. So that is a look at what I'm calling Prairie Jane. The color is Prairie Rain, and the recipient's middle name is Jane. So you know me, I love puns, so Prairie Jane. So that is the first of my Christmas knitting. Next up, we're going to talk about what I'm calling a Thanksgiving gift. It is a Christmas decoration, so I have to give it to them by Thanksgiving so that way they have plenty of time to decorate for Christmas. Because in my family, we like to decorate starting the day after Thanksgiving. So it's just going to be a gnome, but I'm going to knit it Santa style. I may rip this out and restart. I had the body almost completely finished, stuffed, and was working on the decreases when I found out I was almost 6 stitches off on my counts. So I tried to rip back, I couldn't capture stitches, so what you do is you knit the hat and then you pick up stitches and then knit from there. So the hat is knit separately and then you pick up. So it was a lot easier for me to just rip out the body and redo it. However, I'm not sure that that is enough of a white brim when I had it on the body. So I may just completely reknit this hat or keep it and knit this as a Christmas decoration for myself. So more about that in the overhead to come. Next up, I'd like to talk about this gnome. And yes, for some reason, all of the reds come up fluorescent red. So I apologize for that. I'll try and block some of that. I did knit I did knit 3 rows of ribbing and then a bound off, so that way I'd still have 4 rows. And what I should have done was 4 rows of ribbing and then bind off, so I actually have 5. It's perfectly fine. It's just an aesthetic choice that I want an extra row of ribbing. But what that has allowed me is when I flip this around and I go to pick up stitches, all I have to do is I just come in and pick up all of these white stitches. So it makes it very easy to see which stitch I have to pick up. So I have the red below and I have the white above, and I know I just have to pick up every stitch on that white row. That will leave me, I will need to cast on an extra 3 stitches when I go to do that, and that is perfectly fine. I just wove in some ends, and when I get done I will thread this through a needle and send it into the body, so this will not be seen, and these will stay in the body anyways. And then at the very end, when all is said and done, I will put a bell at the end here for a little bit of added extra. Instead of doing a little white tuft there or a pom-pom, I decided a bell would be more festive. So that is a look at what I have on my Christmas gnome. Next up, we're going to be talking about the best scarf ever. I have it completed and blocked. I'm not going to do this in the overhead because I've done quite a few videos on it, and I'm not going to link those because it's been in quite a few. So just look at like the last, I'd say about 6 videos maybe, and you'll see me talking about this, or at least leading up to talking about this. I will put a picture at the very end of the project updates of me wearing it. But that is all for the best scarf ever, and we will move on to our next project. Next, we're going to be talking about the Nebula Shawl, and I can show you the progress of that here. It's a pretty good size. I worked on it yesterday and was able to do another triple yarn over repeat. Like I said, I was knitting on this yesterday. I'm not going to do an overhead. I will link to last week's video that I did the overhead on that. But I was knitting on this yesterday, and as I'm knitting along, I looked at what I had left, which, you know, is still a good amount. However, for a shawl, I want it to be large enough that it could wrap around comfortably, and it's not like it's just a cowl style shawl or like a bandana. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That's just not what I want for this particular project. So as I was knitting along yesterday, I was thinking I may want to, and you guys are going to laugh at me because I do this often, I may want to rip this out and restart and use larger size needles. I like the gauge of this one, but that doesn't mean I like the drape of this one, if that makes sense. With shawls, I don't care so much about gauge of getting X amount of stitches per inch as much as I care about how floopy it is, billowy. So I may rip this out and redo it. However, yesterday while I was thinking about that, I went ahead and typed up my handwritten notes on how to knit this. So I do have that available. If anybody is interested, I will just send me an email and I will get that over to you. I'm not going to put this on Ravelry, at least not in the foreseeable future, not until I have this completely knit up. That way I have pictures of finished and all of that. But if you would like the pattern, be sure to reach out and let me know. And if you do knit it up before I get this put on Ravelry, I would love to be able to put your pictures on the pattern page. So if you would, let me know. Thank you. A project that I forgot to mention in the project intro is this little guy right here. Pull up there. Now you can see the colors. This is the gnome for my neighbor's birthday. He is a Cleveland Browns fan, thus the colors. And so his name is Chomps the Gnome. So I just wanted to show this. I was actually able to film the day before his birthday. So I was able to actually show you rather than just a picture. However, I will be putting pictures at the very end of the projects of this, as well as the best scarf ever. Yesterday I did some swatching for my warding spell shawl. The yarn for that should be coming in this weekend, so I'm very excited. That gives me all of next week to swatch and make sure I pin down the exact needle size that I want, although I already have a pretty good idea of what I'm looking for on that. And I won't be showing the swatch on screen because what I have decided is I will be talking about the pattern. I will be talking about what all went into me designing this pattern. I will be talking about the needle size and the yarn. I can give the gauge that I'm getting, but I'm not going to show any pictures weekly of my progress because it's going to be a mystery project. So again, I'm knitting it throughout the month of October, and I will show a picture at the very end whether I finish the shawl in the month of October. I'm not entirely certain that I will, There are 600 yards in this yarn. It's 150 grams. And I am using larger needles, so hopefully it'll go quickly. But it is a lot of fun to knit, and I'm very excited to get started on that. But like I said, I will not be showing weekly updates on that because I want to keep it as enticing and anticipation and exciting and magical as the holiday of Halloween is itself, because it is being knit in October. And I will show a picture of the yarn, so as soon as that comes in I will do that, and you will see why I picked it, and I'll talk more in depth about it piece by piece. Just know that you won't see any updates until it is completed, so stay tuned for that. Next up, we have two separate bonus bits. Again, there are two pieces of knitting trivia, so stay tuned for that. And I hope you find these exciting, and maybe it encourages you to take these and make it your own. For the first bonus bit of this week's video, we're going to be talking about the world's fastest hand-knit sheep to sweater that is ever been done. Now, I have the information down here on my tablet. I'm going to move it closer so I can read, so I can give you all of the details, and then we can talk a little bit about what that actually means as we go through this. So let me move this tablet over here. So the fastest hand knit sheep to sweater item was made in 4 hours, 45 minutes, and 53 seconds. I will put that time down here at the bottom. It was by a team in Swalmen, Netherlands in 2017. So what a sheep to sweater is they bring a sheep into an area, probably maybe like a barn or an auditorium or something. Anyways, bring the sheep into an area. Somebody shears the sheep, then passes off to someone to wash the wool. Then they pass it off to someone who cards or combs, depending on how they're wanting to spin it. Then they hand it over to a spinner who spins the yarn. They may hand it over to someone to ply the yarn. I'm not entirely certain. And then they hand it to someone who actually starts knitting. So they could be shearing and someone could be knitting at the same time, just depending on how smoothly things go through. So an entire sweater from the back of a sheep to the back of a person took 4 hours, 45 minutes, and 53 seconds. That is outstandingly quick. And I'm not talking about like a sleeveless vest pullover. I'm talking about a full-blown sweater. I will see if I can find a picture, and if I can, I will upload it at the end of this particular bonus bit section. But I was just blown away by how fast that was. Netflix used to have a show, there were two of them, and it was Slow Knitting, and it was them attempting to knit this particular record. Our last bonus bit for this week involves the world's largest knitting needles. I have the information down here on my tablet, so I'm going to be looking down to read these, and I will put the actual stats here at the bottom of the screen. So the world's largest knitting needles were made by an art student in Wiltshire. The name is not given. They measured 14.5 feet long, and I had a diameter of 3.5 inches. I will put the conversion down here for those who use the metric system. To claim the world record, the needles had to be capable of knitting 10 stitches for 10 rows. If they are able to do that, they are technically classified as knitting needles and not just an art piece. So that was done again by someone in Wiltshire. I do not have the date for that. I couldn't find that as I was looking these up. But that is the last of our bonus bit this week, the world's largest knitting needles. As I mentioned, there is an announcement. Next week there will be no knitting video, no knit bits video. There may be a half episode where I talk about the yarn that come in, and I have a couple of different things coming in the mail that I will talk about potentially. But there will be no actual video because I will be house setting all next week. and I'm not taking all of my equipment with me to film because it's quite a bit more than just my phone, tripod, and microphone anymore. So just know that next week there will not be a full video. Like I said, there may be a half video. I haven't really decided yet. It just kind of depends on how stuff plays out. But that is the announcement for next week. To wrap up this week's video, we looked at the final book look of my pattern books. We swatched to do the knit front back and knit front slip, the KFB and KFS respectively. We looked at a bunch of project updates that I have this week, including, but not limited to, gnomes, hats, scarves, shawls, future plans, and the like. We also learned 2 bits of trivia about the world's fastest sheep to sweater, as well as the world's largest functioning knitting needles. We also ended with an announcement that there will not be a video next week, and I just wanted you to be aware of that one more time, just in case you are curious as to why you haven't seen a video yet, because there will not be one uploaded the last week of September, so there will not be one released on October 1st. So just be aware of that. And hopefully things will be back to normal the following week as we begin my mystery project throughout the month of October. I'm very excited and looking forward to that, and looking forward to sending out little teasers in the videos about what is going on with that project. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and I hope you learned something, and most of all, I hope you grabbed some needles and some yarn and knit along with me in the Swatch Lab. Until the next video, keep knitting.